He left.
Translation. Vidura inquired from the sage Maitreya, "My dear brāhmaṇa, King Aṅga was very gentle. He had high character and was a saintly personality and a lover of brahminical culture. How is it that such a great soul had a bad son like Vena, because of whom he became indifferent to his kingdom and left it?" Please repeat. Vidura inquired from the sage Maitreya.
Vidura inquired from the sage Maitreya.
"My dear brāhmaṇa,
My dear brāhmaṇa,
King Aṅga was very gentle.
King Aṅga was very gentle.
He had high character and was a saintly personality.
He had high character and was a saintly personality.
A lover of brahminical culture. How is it that such a great soul got a bad son like Vena?"
How is it that such a great soul got a bad son like Vena?
Because of whom?
Because of whom
he became indifferent.
He became indifferent
to his kingdom and left it. Okay, I'll mute everyone. Purport. In family life, a man is supposed to live happily with father, mother, wife, and children, and sometimes under certain conditions, a father, mother, child, or wife becomes an enemy. It is said by Chanakya Pandit that a father is an enemy when he is too much in debt. A mother is an enemy if she marries for a second time. A wife is an enemy when she is very beautiful. And a son is an enemy when he is a foolish rascal. In this way, when a family member becomes an enemy, it is very difficult to live in family life or remain a householder. Generally, such situations occur in this material world. Therefore, according to Veda culture, one has to take leave of his family members just after the 50th year, so that the balance of his life may be completely devoted in search of Krishna consciousness. Viduruvacha tasya shila nidhe sadhur brahmanyasya mahatmanaha ragya katam abudushta prajayad vimanayau. Translation again is Vidura inquired from the sage Maitreya, "My dear brāhmaṇa, King Aṅga was very gentle. He had high character and was a saintly personality and lover of brahminical culture. How is it that such a great soul got a bad son like Vena, because of whom he became indifferent to his kingdom and left it?" So here it is explained that King Aṅga is Shila Nidhe. He's an ocean of good qualities, both in his personal character and exemplary conduct. First of all, he's a sadhu, a saintly person, which means that he's completely transparent, non-envious to everybody. And then also, as far as his outward or exemplary character, he is described here as brahmanyasya. He devoted his life and his resources as a king to promoting brahminical culture. Not only that, he's the Mahatmana. Mahatma is to all living entities. He's benevolent, giving. He's like his life is meant for others. So for such a responsible personality who cares for all of the citizens, and so many were dependent on him, both animals and what to speak of human beings, all of the subjects. How is it possible that his family life was so bad that he left it in disgust? So since Aṅga, one way to look at this is he was a king, right? So what did the king have? He has soldiers. We are kings and queens in our own right. Before we were married, we were princes and princesses, and now we're kings and queens. And I'm not just making this up. This is Shastric. Here's this verse. I'll pull this up. So here we have from the second canto, we all remember this famous verse. So it says, Deha Patra Kaladrishu Atma Sainyeshu Atatsuapi. So you got your Atma, and then your Patras, your family members, your children, your own body, your wife, and everything else. Those are all considered to be Atma Sainyeshu. Sainyeshu. Or in other words, these are our own soldiers. We have our own little army here. And if you think about it, what are soldiers? Soldiers are those who you rely on to fight your battles, and especially at a time of war. I mean, nobody likes war. For all of us old guys, remember back in the 60s, the saying was, make love, not war. You know, all these slogans, and peace and brotherhood and friendship, all those things. In other words, let's have a little Swargaloka, a little heaven on earth here. But it doesn't turn out that way. Wars are forced upon us. They never stop. How many slogans you want to put out there, your good intentions, it just doesn't happen that way. This world is a dangerous place. It's a very hostile environment, and there's perpetual wars, both externally and internally. This material nature, it's certified, Jivo Jivasya Jivanam, says in the Bhagavatam, that one living entity is meant to be food devoured by the stronger living entities. As a matter of fact, envy, it's called matsara. So matsara is just like a big fish eating a smaller fish. That is the world. So if we don't have a standing army, do you know what happens? If you don't have an army ready to go, then you will be crushed. You'll either be subjugated, enslaved, or killed, one or the other. So what's required for a war? An army needs a good general to conduct the battle, and you need soldiers to carry out the orders of the general. The general doesn't have any power without soldiers. But what if the soldiers don't follow the order of the general? Or worse still, they go against the orders of the general. There are basically three types of useless soldiers. Either they're incompetent, they're useless, or worst of all, they're traitors. If they're willing but incompetent, then that's very frustrating. You know, just like if you want the soldiers to go and take that hill, but if they can't, or if they're all killed, then that's of course a source of frustration. Or if they're unwilling, useless, then they're just a burden for the general, just like Patton, General Patton, well known during World War II. He went to a hospital when he saw a soldier that wasn't injured, but he was like all jittery because of battle fatigue or shell shock, and or post-traumatic stress disorder, as it's called nowadays, I think. And Patton slapped the guy, and for that he got in a lot of trouble. So this is also a frustration. If the soldiers are incapable, or if they don't even want to fight, then that's also just a burden. Or worst of all, if they're traitors, then they're actually harmful, if they're spies or traitors. So similarly, in family life, we have our soldiers. We have our mother and our father and our wife, or our husband and our sons and daughters. You know, thinking about it, what is the father? He's meant to be. He's who you look up to, especially for your financial support. And the mother is very much for emotional and physical needs. What to speak of the wife or the husband, the most intimate, lifelong friend, you know, who you have absolute trust in. And as far as sons and daughters, these are your future investments. You can count on them, both in this life and the life after death. if you're knowledgeable enough, take it to heavenly planets, or at least they can take care of you in old age, so you rely on them. But when do these become enemies? So Chanakya Pandit says, if the father, he dies, instead of giving you the estate, he gives you a bunch of debts, then he's your enemy. Or if the mother, she marries twice, especially if you're young. But even if you're older, you like feel betrayed. Your mother married for the second time. And if the wife is too good looking, or if the husband's too popular, then that's an enemy. And the sons are the daughters, especially the sons. But the daughter too, bad daughter and a bad son, they become an enemy. So we have this instance that Vena, the son of Aṅga, he turned out to be horrible. And we'll find out what happens performing the sacrifice, and the demigods are coming. So they ask the sages, why? King Aṅga asks, why are the demigods not accepting their portion of the sacrifice? They said, because he didn't have a son. So they arranged for him to have a sacrifice and get a son. And when he had a son, he was so terrible that he had to leave family life. He just gave up everything in disgust. So if you're the king or the general of your family, be a male general or a female general, we have our soldiers, but if they're incompetent, it's nothing but frustration, or if they're useless, they're just a headache, or if they're a traitor, they're actually your enemy. So in the Kali Yuga, it's almost impossible to find good soldiers. In other words, family members, or even our own body, as it said in the Bhagavatam in this verse. So why? Here we have King Aṅga. Now he's in a different yuga, and he's a saintly king. Therefore, it's astonishing. Vidura is saying, why? Even King Aṅga, he left his family life. But in the Kali Yuga, it's almost impossible to find anybody that has a happy family life. I don't know what the divorce rate is, but it's really up there. So why? It's because we ourselves are foolish, incompetent, and useless generals. We are our own worst enemies. Just like there's that Pogo, he was this swamp rat or something back in the 60s, I suppose. He was in cartoons, and he was a philosophical swamp rat. And one time he made this very philosophical point. He said, we have found the enemies, and it is us. We are our own worst enemies. So soldiers are not the only problem. If the general himself is incompetent, then that's the problem. So what to do? How to become a good soldier? A good general. Even if Aṅga Maharaj, he's described here as Shila Nidhe, which means an ocean of good qualities. But even him, in the verse it says, Dushta Praja. He had a very, very bad son. He was so bad that Vimana Yayau, that he gave up, left everything in disgust. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport that at least at the age of 50 we have to give up. And he always quotes this verse. Pancho means 50. So Panchosh Urdhvam Vanam. Go to the forest, get out of family life, at least by the age of 50. Go to the forest, perform austerities, do whatever you have to do to get out of town, leave. That's what Shastra says. So in this connection, there is the history of King Puranjana. Right now we're on chapter 13. In chapter 25 of Canto 4, there will be the history of King Puranjana. Narada Muni, we just read the verse a few days ago that Vidura is asking, so who are the Prajetas that you've mentioned? Maitreya is going to talk about the Prajetas later on. And in a conversation that Narada Muni has, first of all, he instructs the Prajetas, and then later on, out of compassion, he goes back to their father, which is King Prachini Barishat, and he instructs them about self-realization through a very elaborate analogy about the history of bygone ages of this king Puranjana. So Puran means within the body, and Jana means living entity. So Puranjana means one who is embodied, or one who enjoys the body, or bodily forms. So this Puranjana, this very powerful king, he had a friend. His friend's name was Avigyata. Avigyata means the unknown one, because the king forgot about his friend a long, long time ago. And he searched everywhere, all over the universe, for a suitable place to fulfill his unlimited desires, but he couldn't find anything that would satisfy him. He found insufficiency everywhere, until he finally came to a place on the southern side of the Himalayas in Bharatvarsha, and he found this wonderful land. The entire area is called Panchala, and he went to the capital city, and he was amazed at the beauty of this capital city. So, here we go. I hope you find these useful, the little PowerPoint. So this city, it had 9 gates. 2 of those gates were subterranean, and then the others they were all different directions. So there was 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth, 1 genital, and 1 rectum. On the east and the west, the subterranean gates were there. They were the genital and the rectum. And then on the north and the south, there was the left and the right ears. And then on the east side, there was 2 eyes, a mouth, and a nose. And through all these different gates, later on, Puranjana, he would go with certain friends and associates, and he would visit different towns and cities. So this was an amazing place. It was a city that was surrounded by parks and walls and towers and canals, windows and outlets. It had beautiful domes made of silver and gold and iron, and even the floors, they were made of sapphires and crystals, rubies, diamonds, emeralds. It was just like the celestial kingdom called Bhogavati. Fantastic. He had found what he was looking for. So what are the walls and the parks? The walls were the skin, and the parks were the hairs and the body, the beautiful hairs of the body. These were the parks. And then the towers, they were the head and the raised nose. The trenches and the canals, they were wrinkles and depressions in the body. And the eyes, they were the windows, and the outlets, or the protective gates, they were the eyelids. And what were the houses that were made of decorated domes of gold and silver and iron? The body itself is made up of the 3 modes of material nature. This city was so beautiful. It had festoons and parks and gambling houses and all kinds of roads. Even, like I was saying, even the floors of the houses, they were made of all these precious gems. So what is the floor? The floor is what you stand on. It's the basis that you stand in. Oh, we just had an earthquake. Sorry. So the floor is what you stand on, and it's made of all these valuable, precious gems. So what are those, the rubies and the emeralds? those are our desires, our aspirations, and our plans. We think they're just so wonderful. Yeah, I can do this and that. I found it. So as he was wandering in this beautiful city, heavenly abode that he had found, lo and behold, he saw this absolutely gorgeous lady. I mean, talk about a babe. I mean, she was Miss Universe, without a doubt. She had this golden belt around a silk yellow sari, and with the ends of her sari, she was trying to cover her breast. I mean, she was like, wow. He couldn't take her eyes off of her. And not only that, she looked at Puranjana with very shyly, but at the same time you could tell there was a lot of lust in her. She really wanted him. So he was absolutely amazed at this woman, very, very attracted to her. Miss Universe for sure. And who was Miss Universe? She was the intelligence. And she was had 10 servants and 11 friends. So who were those servants? The servants are listed here. They all had different names. Some of them were the active senses, and some of them were the knowledge-gathering senses. Their names were Sotrium, the ears, or another was Tvak, which is the skin. Another name was Chakshus, the eyes, Jiva, tongue, Nasika, nose. And then some of their other names were Vak, Karau, Charnau, Vidura, and Payu, or the mouth, the hands, the legs, the genitals, and the anus. These are the active and the knowledge-gathering senses. And so these are the servants, and he also had friends. And then the head of them all, the ones that was in charge, that directed all the rest, he was the mind, the mana. So she was surrounded by all these friends and associates and servants, and she also was protected on all sides by a 5-hooded snake. So what was the 5-hooded snake? That was the life heirs. So when Puranjana saw this woman, he tried to seduce her like anything. It's amazing, this conversation that he has, just complimenting her, because he was very good at flattery. So he was trying to seduce her however he could, and asked her, like, where are you coming from? Whose daughter are you? You appear to be very shy, but still I can see there's desire there. And what purpose did you come for here? You don't particularly have any kind of engagement, and what are you trying to do? So she finally answered him in a very shy way and says, I don't know anything. I don't know where I came from or whose daughter I am. I just got here, and I'm enjoying this place, and I made it for you. And we're just existing here. Let us go off together and enjoy. And he asks about who are these servants and who's the snake? He says, oh, the snake protects me always, even when I sleep. So you think about it, even when you're sleeping, you're breathing. It never stops, always protecting us. And he protects the entire city. So she said, I've created actually the city for you to enjoy. Let us live here for 100 years and enjoy together. So he very happily accepted her proposal and then started happily living together, accepted her as his queen because he was a great hero and he was, saying how wonderful life would be together and blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to read a couple of verses here. Here's the description of what life was like with the queen. When the queen drank liquor, King Puranjana also engaged in drinking. When the queen dined, he used to dine with her. And when she chewed, King Puranjana used to chew along with her. When the queen sang, he also sang. Similarly, when the queen cried, he also cried. And when the queen laughed, he also laughed. When the queen talked loosely, he also talked loosely. And when the queen walked, the king walked behind her. When the queen would stand still, the king would also stand still. And when the queen would lie down in bed, he would also follow the queen. And when the queen heard something, he would also follow her to hear the same thing. When the queen saw something, the king would also look at it. And when the queen smelled something, the king would also follow her to smell the same thing. When the queen touched something, the king would also touch it. And when the dear queen was lamenting, the poor king would also follow her in lamentation. In the same way, when the queen felt enjoyment, he also enjoyed. And when the queen was satisfied, the king also felt satisfaction. So this is an elaboration of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, Prakrite kriyamanani, that everything that happens in this world is being done by the three modes of material nature. It's all done by my energy. But gunai karmani sarvasha, by the three modes of material nature, but the foolish living entity, he thinks that he's the doer. So there's one scientist by the name of Benjamin Levitt. In the 1980s, this scientist, he hooked up people to a EEG machine, and he proved, he demonstrated that there's a difference between physical function and cognitive functions, where different movements of the body. He would ask him, like raise your wrist or something like that, and he would time with the machine how long it would take to acknowledge the movement. So it turned out that the movement would happen before the acknowledgement by a fraction of a second, so many milliseconds. So actually, material nature is producing a result, and then we become aware of it, and then we think that we're the doers. So this elaborate description of how the queen, or our intelligence, is doing everything, and then we're following her like a dancing dog. This is what's happening in the material nature. So in a purport for this long series of verses, Srila Prabhupada says, in this way, King Puranjana was captivated by his nice wife and was thus cheated. Indeed, he became cheated in his whole existence in the material world. Even against that poor foolish king's desire, he remained under the control of his wife, just like a pet animal that dances according to the order of its master. So in this way, he was enjoying with the queen his own foolish intelligence, and he passed away his life in half a moment. Anybody that's elderly, like myself, looks back, and it's literally as it's described in the Bhagavatam. It's half a moment has passed, gone. Old age is here, and like, what happened? I was a teenager a moment ago. Now, how come I'm in an old body? That's what it is. Life passes imperceptibly in a moment. And the same with Puranjana. Even though he engaged in all kinds of enjoyment with his wife, his intelligence, he had hundreds and thousands of offspring. He had 1,100 sons with 110 daughters. And each of them got married, and they had their own thousands and thousands of grandchildren that overcrowded the city, and they were all plunderers of his intelligence, his spiritual intelligence, which is meant for the human form of life, and his own senses. All these children and grandchildren, they were all the unlimited desires, as also explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Bahu shaka hyanantascha, for the materialistic persons. So Srila Prabhupada says in another purport, even though we may produce many good children, our desire for sex that is beyond the prescribed method is to be considered sinful. Too much enjoyment of any of the senses, not only sex, results in sinful activities. Therefore, one has to become Swami or Goswami at the end of his life. One may beget children up to the age of 50, but after 51, One must stop begetting children and should accept vanaprastha order. In this way, he must leave home and then become a sannyasi. A sannyasi's title is Swami or Goswami, which means that he completely refrains from sense enjoyment. One should not accept sannyas order whimsically. He must be fully confident that he can restrain his desires for sense gratification. So here we go to the next slide. Just 2 more slides left. What had happened is that in Gandharva Loka there was a king called Chandravega. So Chandravega means very swiftly passing away. And he was a Gandharva Raj. So who's a Gandharva Raj? This is Yamaraj. Gandharva also refers to those who are expert in making illusions or mirage. So this Gandharva Raj or Chandravega, he had 360 powerful Gandharva soldiers. 360 of them were white male Gandharvas. And these were the days, and each of them had a female dark Gandharvi to accompany them, and they were the knights. And they were plunderers of cities, and they went and found out Puranjana's capital city, in this Panchala, and they started plundering. So the snake, who was the chief of security, the chief of police, he was fighting with all of these Gandharva soldiers. But you think about it, he was fighting alone with 720 powerful enemy soldiers. And after 50 such attacks, then he started to get really weak. And then seeing the snake becoming weak, Puranjana and all of his friends and his ministers, they all became very, very anxious, all of the citizens of the city. And then at the same time, the daughter of Time, her name was Kalakanya, she was going through the universe seeking for a suitable mate. But wherever she went, no one would accept her as her husband because nobody wanted her. Her name was Jara. Jara is old age. Who wants old age? Therefore, she was called Durbaga, which means ill-fated. That was her situation. She comes, but nobody likes her. So one time, Narada explained, again, this is to King Prachani. One time he came to the earth planet from Brahmaloka, and as soon as Jara, this Kalakanya, saw him, knowing that he was an avowed brahmachari throughout his life, she became very, very lusty and attracted to him. So she approached him, and Narada could not accept her. He rejected her, and she became very, very angry. You know, when a woman is rejected like that, then she becomes so angry that she mercilessly cursed Narada. It says, because you've rejected me, you can never stay in one place for very, very long. So after that, Narada, being merciful, he said, all right, I cannot become your husband, but I know of a Yavanaraj. Yavanaraj, he is Baya. I'm sorry, I said wrong. I said Chandravega was Yamaraj, excuse me. The king of the Yavanas is Yamaraj, and his name is Baya. So if you go to Baya, Baya will accept you as his wife. He can become your husband. So she was happy. She went to him. So she went to this Yavanaraj and asked him to accept her. However, Yavanaraj said, no. Better you accept my brother. His brother's name was Prajvara. Prajvara means fever. It means the fever sent by Lord Vishnu. So it's fever is influenza, tuberculosis, pneumonia, any of these things that burn the body. So that was Prajvara. So she was very happy to accept Prajvara. And Yavanaraj Baya, his plan was that these two, when they're coupled together, they could help him attack the city of Puranjana because they're imperceptible. So Yavanaraj, Baya, Prajvara, disease, and then Kalakanya, or Jara, they all came with all the soldiers, 720 male and female soldiers, and then together they were attacking the Panchala kingdom of Puranjana. And because Puranjana was too attached to sex throughout his youth, therefore it was easy for him to become diseased and have invalidity in his old age. And the Baya, Jara, and Prajvara, they started to attack all of the gates of the city. And then here's how it's described. When King Puranjana was When King Puranjana was embraced by Kalakanya, he gradually lost all of his beauty. Having been too much attached to sex, he became very poor in intelligence and lost all of his opulences. Being bereft of all possessions, he was conquered forcibly by the Gandharvas and the Yavanas. King Puranjana then saw that everything in his town was scattered and that his sons, grandsons, servants, and ministers were all gradually opposing him. He also noted that his wife was becoming cold and indifferent. So you think about this, the head of the family, he provides everything for the family, but then when he becomes old and invalid and doesn't have that ability anymore, then naturally the family members become indifferent to him. So similarly, when we become old and cannot provide the enjoyment to the senses, we become so frustrated. That's what happens in the body of Puranjana, body of the kingdom of Panchala. So when King Puranjana saw that all of his family members, relatives, followers and servants, secretaries, and everyone else had turned against him, he certainly became very anxious. But he could not counteract the situation because he was thoroughly overwhelmed by Kalakanya. The objects of enjoyment became stale by the influence of Kalakanya. Due to the continuance of his lusty desires, King Puranjana became very poor in everything. Thus, he did not understand the aim of life. He was still very affectionate towards his wife and children, and he worried about maintaining them. The city of King Puranjana was overcome by the Gandharvas and the Yavana soldiers, and although the king had no desire to leave the city, he was certainly forced to do so, for it was smashed by Kalakanya. Under the circumstances, the elder brother of Yavanaraj, known as Prajvara, set fire to the city, and to please his younger brother, whose other name was Fear himself. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, according to the Vedic system, the dead body is set on fire. But before death, there is another fire or fever which is called Prajvara, which is Vishnu Dvara. Medical science verifies that when one's temperature raises to 107 degrees, a man immediately dies. This Prajvara, or high fever, at the last stage of life, places the living entity in the midst of blazing fire. So just like if you have a forest fire, snakes, they can't go very far. Other animals, they can try and flee, but the snakes, because they crawl on the ground, they are very much harassed, and sometimes they take shelter of a tree, in the hollow of a tree, but still they're burned up, and they want to leave the fire, but they can't. So similarly, the snake, who's the superintendent, the life heirs, the 5 life heirs, he couldn't leave. And then it's explained that other animals, they can try and flee. So similarly, the limbs of the body, they're not as harassed as the life heirs at the time of death. So again, just reading a little bit more, the limbs of the serpent's body were slackened by the Gandharvas and the Yavana soldiers, who were thoroughly defeated the bodily strength. When he attempted to leave the body, he was checked by his enemies. Being thus baffled in his attempts he began to cry loudly. So he was lamenting at this time for his wife and his children. Well, this is not the time to lament for your family. He should have been concerned about where he was going, because he's just about to leave his body. So, and then at that time, Yavanaraj, with his fear himself, immediately he drew near and he arrested Puranjana. So when the Yavanas were taking King Puranjana away to their place, binding him like an animal, the king's followers became greatly aggrieved, and while lamenting, they were forced to go along with him. So he's lamenting about his family members and like that, but they're going to follow him. In other words, all of the desires that he had, they're all going to follow him to the next life. The serpent, who had already been arrested by the soldiers of Yavanaraj and was out of the city, began to follow his master along with the others. As soon as they left the city, it was immediately dismantled and smashed to dust. So as soon as the life bearers leave, then the body collapses. When King Puranjana was being dragged with great force by the powerful Yavana, out of his gross ignorance, he still could not remember his friend, the well-wisher, the Supersoul. So, this is the last slide right here. So what happened, we'll find out, is that Puranjana became, because he was thinking about his wife and his family at the time of death, he became a woman in the next lifetime. And that's what happens to all of us. We're in different species of life, sometimes in human form, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman. The real problem is not the family members of the soldiers, the Sainya, but it's actually us. We have a lusty intelligence that we've accepted for our queen, and we're following that queen in different species of life, in different forms of life, from time farther than we can remember. So Maharaj Aṅga, he thought that actually it was a great blessing on him that he had such a bad son, because it inspired him. He was just going to leave home and take up self-realization. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada is pointing out in this verse, in the purport, rather, that at least at the time of half of our life is finished, at the age of 50, we should leave family life and go to the forest. In other words, leave our terrible, ridiculous, embarrassing desires behind. Pancho urdhvam vanang vrajat. Give up at the age of 50 and go to the forest. Give up the wife, or in other words, the lusty intelligence, the children, all of our embarrassing desires, and completely devote ourselves to Krishna consciousness and take shelter of our friend, Avijñāta, that we've forgotten about, that's hidden. So this is what I'm closing with. Again, we're just, this section began with the inquiry Vidura to Maitreya, that who are the prachetas and what is the sacrifice that is being spoken of. So the prachetas, they went off to perform austerities for 10,000 years, and on their way to perform austerities under the water, they met Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva gave them a prayer to Lord Vishnu. And they took that prayer that was so wonderful, and they meditated on that for 100,000 years. That was their austerity. So this is a wonderful, wonderful prayer, and I just wanted to read a couple of these verses that are pertaining to the beauty of Lord Vishnu. So one thing is to give up our nonsense desires, and the other is to accept truly desires for serving the Lord that will finally satisfy us. So instead of wandering throughout the universe like Puranjana and having to repeat this pitiable story again and again and again, we can take shelter of the Lord. So this is verse 44 through 48, and then we'll close. So, my dear Lord, this is Lord Shiva's prayers to Lord Vishnu, and he's explaining it to the prachetas. My dear Lord, I wish to see you exactly in the form that your dear devotees worship. You have many other forms, but I wish to see that form that is especially liked by your devotees. Please be merciful unto me and show me that form, that for only that form is worshipped by devotees, can perfectly satisfy all the demands of the senses. So Puranjana was wandering everywhere and he could never satisfy his senses, and there's this pitiful story about another lifetime wasted. So to satisfy all of our senses, the Lord can satisfy our senses, no one else. So the Lord's beauty resembles a dark cloud during the rainy season. As the rainfall glistens, his bodily features also glisten. Indeed, he is a sum total of all beauty. The Lord has 4 arms and has an exquisitely beautiful face with lotus-like eyes, like lotus petals, a beautiful, highly raised nose, a mind-attracting smile, a beautiful forehead, and equally beautiful and fully decorated ears. The Lord is super excellently beautiful on account of his open and merciful smile and his sidelong glance upon his devotees. So I was thinking about a sidelong glance. You know, if somebody looks at you, you know, in our younger days, you know, the male or the female will give you a sidelong glance, you know, so like after they pass, they look back at you. In other words, they're thinking about you lovingly. So the Lord, he gives a sidelong glance. His black hair is curly and his garments, waving in the wind, appear like flowing saffron pollen from the lotus flower. His glistening earrings and shining helmet, garlands, ankle bells, bangles, and wrist belt, and various other bodily ornaments combined with the conch shell, disc, club, and lotus flower to increase the natural beauty of the Kaustubha pearl on his chest. So that's it. I hope you found that valuable. I will unmute everybody and ask if there's any questions or comments. Okay, there you go. Thank you very much, Bruce. I'll go to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
I have a question.
Okay.
Dandavats Ramananda for your class. You mentioned it at some point about a cognitive delay. By the way, the earthquake that you felt, there was a few seconds delay here.
Oh, really? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it must have, and it was kind of mild, really almost, it wouldn't have woken me up if I was sleeping, but yeah, so the epicenter must have been near you, closer to you.
Wow.
Anyway, you mentioned something about a cognitive delay. I'd like you to just kind of go over that a little bit. Somebody did some experiment, and it had to do with the modes, controlling our actions rather than ourselves.
Back in the 80s, there was this neuroscientist that did experiments. There's a machine that you can hook. It's called an EEG machine. You hook up different people to it, and it goes especially around the scalp. You like shave your head and then put it around the scalp in different parts of your body. But it measures brain waves. So according to different stimuli, it'll trigger different things in the brain, which show cognitive understanding. So it used to be that we would think that you would have a desire. It goes to your nervous system, and then it gives you an impulse. But with this machine, what it did is it showed that actually the action would happen first, and then you'd become conscious of it. They could measure it in milliseconds. So material nature is performing the action, and then you become aware of it, and then you think that you did it because it's so fast. but there's actually a delay. So the reason why I read this whole description, I thought it was really great about when he's following the queen around and whatever she does, he does next. He follows her in every way. And that's exactly what happens in material nature. It's just kartaham niti manyate. We think we're the doer, but actually the queen is doing it. Our intelligence, our material nature, the three modes of material nature is performing these activities. And so there is actually documented clinical evidence that there's a difference between the physical functions and the cognitive functions.
Do you have his name, this guy that did the experiment?
Levitt.
I'm sorry?
Dr. Benjamin Levitt. Benjamin Levitt. L-I-B-E-T. Benjamin Levitt. Not all neuroscientists accept his findings, but they're well known.
Okay, so you're saying he's measured a gap, although a very short gap, between physical actions of the body and the cognitive function, being aware of it?
The cognitive functions follow the physical functions, which is pretty far out.
So you act and then you're aware of it split second later.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about if we don't get a second, we get like sleepwalking, we don't even cognizant awareness of what we're doing at all? Can that time be adjusted for circumstance?
I don't know. I don't follow that. Sorry.
Well, it seemed like what I was understanding is that you do something and then there's a delay before you recognize that you just did something. Was that right?
Right.
So I was thinking, half in jest, that sometimes we don't recognize it at all. We're just kind of out of it. You know, sometimes in the morning I'm driving to the temple and I get to the temple and I wonder, how did I get here again? You know, the horse goes back to the barn reflex, where, you know that statement, the horse goes back to the barn?
No.
If you're riding a horse and the horse knows that you don't know how to ride, it doesn't listen to you. It just
goes back to the barn?
Yeah, I had that experience because when you're young, they say, well, let's go horseback riding. So finally I went one time, and I'm driving this horse around, riding the horse around, and I really didn't know how to control the horse very well. And then he just started moving on his own. He went back to the barn, and then I was stuck. There I was. Everybody was out, and he just took me back to the barn, and he wasn't going out. So it's just there's a statement like that if you're not paying attention, you'll just take a familiar route. I don't know. I guess it's never happened to you that if you're driving and you forget for a while that you're driving, you just find yourself back either at your house or wherever, familiar route that you usually take. People go to school, they go to work, they do it every day. They kind of do it half consciously. So that's what I was saying, that it seems sometimes people do things and they're not even aware at all that they just did it. Sometimes with Alzheimer's, different diseases, you're not even cognizant that what you're doing. So I was wondering if it was along that same line. And then, of course, I was recognizing, I was thinking about my japa, you know, and chanting my japa. And I'm inattentive, and you don't even know that you're doing it. Your mind's someplace else and everything. It was
I was thinking the same thing, Madon. It kind of sounded like reminding me of my Gayatris. It's like,
oh yeah, there's a good
you're
example.
done. You're all done. It's like, can I remember a single mantra that I said?
Was it the third line or the fifth line? Which one am I on?
Sometimes I just start over.
I start over too. The first one's so bad I have to do it again.
Yeah.
Really. And I had the same
one.
experience on a horse that Madan had. I was on it was just out of the blue. I was staying at some farm, and these rich hippies. They, said, let's go horseback riding. I have never been on a horse before. And we didn't have saddles or anything, just had a rope on his nose or something, no bridles, no hardware. And this horse, within a very short time, within a few minutes, he understood I had no clue how to ride a horse. And so he just flips around and he gallops back to where we started, and he jumps a fence, and I left his body. I got off of him as he goes over the fence. But that is interesting. That's interesting because I wonder, like the mind of some friends of mine, Maitreya and Aṅga, two New York devotees, God brothers of ours, they did a play where one of them played Maitreya was playing this guy that was at work and he's bored and he's, and his mind is starting to suggest things. And Aṅga is playing his mind.
Could you mute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I sure will.
And Aṅga is playing his mind. And it was striking to see the separation between the person and the mind. Like the mind is its own, it's like, a separate entity. And if you don't focus on the mind, like you don't focus on the horse, if you don't show the horse that you're in control, the mind just goes off does whatever it does. Right? Like the horse. Anybody there?
That's a great analogy, Madan. I'll really remember that. That's great. I'd never had that experience, though, but it's really cute.
Yeah.
Yes, that's totally true. I owned a horse before. I'm real familiar with them. And they definitely know through just the most subtle body language. They just seem to know your mind. And if you're not experienced or if you're not in tune to them and what they're up to, they will definitely take advantage. And they will just take off like that. So that's such a wonderful example about the mind and the intelligence and just our senses being stolen away. It's exactly what it's like. And for you to be put on a horse with no saddle, and for the first time, that was such a foolish thing for hippies to have you do. Oh my God!
Leave it to the hippies. Right.
Jeez. You have to know how to ride and know how to hang on.
Yeah, I could.
That was dangerous.
It was one other experience. I can talk to you about the danger of it. So, sometime later, we all got horses. There were 3 of us, these Rotarians. And Iowa, he was this guy that was kind of rough and ready, real physical, like Beamer or something. And he kind of bullied or coaxed me into going on a ride with him. I didn't really want to go. But we only had a rope on his nose, around his nose, and that's and then a blanket. That was it. No saddle, no nothing. So we get down to the road. Yes.
You can't control a horse.
Yeah, right. So we get down to the road, the asphalt road, and these are in mountains in an island, and he decides, let's race. And I said, and he knows more about horses than I do. And so I said, no, forget it. And then he hits the back of his horse with the rope, and his horse takes off. I didn't do anything, but my horse wasn't going to just stand there. He bolts after Iowa and his horse. And we passed Iowa like he was painted on a fence. The horse that I was on was really fast. And I've got a handful of his mane at this horse that I'm on, and the blanket's gone, and I'm off his back. I'm practically horizontal on this horse. That's how fast we're going. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're on asphalt. If he just pulls up, I'm over his head. I'm like, going to go 50 feet onto the asphalt.
Ooh.
So I grabbed the rope. Yeah, I grabbed the rope. Yeah, I grabbed the rope and I pulled his head. I turned his head to the right. And I saw a hill coming up. We're in the mountains, so there was a road off to the right. It was a steep grade, and I pulled his head to the right as hard as I could, and it made him turn up the grade, and he slowed down enough that I could jump off.
Wow, Krishna saved you. I mean, Christopher Reeve, he fell off. He was an experienced rider, and he fell off of a horse that he was jumping and broke his neck, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. And people die from something like that. If your head had hit the asphalt, you could have died. Could have.
Oh, no question.
Rake Krishna, more AK.
Yeah. So that was good. Krishna directed you to go up that incline. So thank God for that. Anyway, yeah, the senses are, they carry us to death. Exactly.
Yeah, the example in Bhagavad Gita is a chariot with 5 horses. That's the example.
The conversation that Narada is going to have with Prachini Barisha, he also does a very elaborate simile about the chariot and the horses. That's mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. So it's quite elaborate. It goes on for many, many verses.
How about
where is that? Where is that?
It's like chapter 27 or something in Canto 4. We'll come up to it.
What about with the other species that we call it instinct, or the scientists will say they did something out of instinct? They're not aware pretty much of it at all, or maybe they're more aware of it, but animals, they have that, in psychology, the conditioned response. Pavlov, they ring the bell and he does something, salivates.
Yeah.
So there's always, do they measure that with animals too? How long did it take between the bell ringing and the salivation took place? Or what was your point again, Ramananda, with that?
With Benjamin Levitt's experiments?
Yes, sir, because it seems like he hit a funny bone with us, so he went off a bit.
That the body will perform an action, and then you become aware of it. So you have your desire, the body acts, and then you become aware of it. So it shows that material nature carries out all the activities, and then we just identify it. That was the whole point that I pulled out those verses about how Puranjana is following the queen everywhere. She does something, and then he does it. So similarly, the body does something, and then we think that we're the doers.
Well, I think really my remembrance of when I studied neurology, there's actually 2 different systems: the autonomic and the para. I forgot the exact terms, but it can happen either way. If the mind thinks something, then if it wants to do something, then the body will act. But sometimes the body acts on its own, independent of the mind, and then the mind becomes aware of it. Yeah, that's it. Sympathetic and autonomic or something like that. I have to look. I can't remember. I think you're right, Madonna. I think that's one of them. But I think it can go either way.
Tulsi says Paris and... How do you say this? Paris and...
There's the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So there's like the conscious behavior, and then there's the things that your body's doing automatically all the time, like the breathing and pumping blood.
There we go. So right. So some things the mind acts first, and sometimes the body acts first. It can happen either way.
It's interesting. The word para is also a Sanskrit word for meaning other. Like the par dukkha dukki, or Par. There's a bunch of pars around, the others.
Anyway, Bruce, thank you. I particularly, for myself, I found going again through this story about Puranjana really, it meant a lot to me. So that's why I thought I'd bring it back. And we're going to go over this for many chapters coming up in a few months from now when we cover this. But I was really affected by it, so I thought that's why I kind of work it into the class. Anyway, I
think that's the nature of all these wonderful stories. Each time you read it, you just go deeper and deeper into it. It's like you think, wow, I got so much out of it the last time, and you read them again. It's like it's almost like you never read it before. It's a whole nother ride. They're wonderful.
Isn't that Narada Muni? He's talking to the king, and he put it into, was it second person or third person? So he was talking to the king, and just so the king could understand it without identifying with it so much that he would blank it out, he had to put it into a story form. Isn't that the way it started, Ramananda?
The way it's described is that Narada went to the king, and then he asked him, why you're performing all these sacrifices, what's your purpose? And then he started the story, so it wasn't really explained like that, but he just...
I thought it was, because it says sometimes you can't tell somebody directly something because it's too close to them that they'll just defense it away.
Right, that's true.
So you just put it into a story, and then they hear the story, and towards the end of the story you say, oh, you're talking about me, aren't you? They listen.
At the
very
end,
important.
He asked him, he said, that this is really deep for me. Can you explain the analogy? And then Narada Muni explained what all the different things were, what they represented.
And that principle is true for all of us as we, practically everything we read, like the Bhagavad Gita. We're Arjuna. We're supposed to relate very much to Arjuna. Arjuna thought he knew something. He thought he was intelligent. And Krishna said, yeah, you're speaking like an intelligent person, but actually you're a fool. He had it completely wrong. His whole concept of what's right, what's wrong, what is it, what to do and what not to do, he had it completely wrong. And when we read about, and practically everything we read, even like Dhruva, what he did was amazing. If we remember, Prabhupada said that we can do the same thing that Dhruva did. Of course, it's not in detail what he did, but the principle of what he did. He followed the order of his guru. We follow the order of our guru. He was given particular instructions. We're given different instructions. He attained perfection. We'll attain perfection. So all the things that we read, we have to see how they apply to us, because they all do. Otherwise, why would we be reading them?
Well, along the same point is Jud Bharat, when he talked to the king Rahugana, he at the end, when the king wanted to hear some knowledge from him, Jud Bharat talked to him, and at the end of, he went over for 3 chapters in a row. The first chapter, after he explains everything, he says, oh, that's really nice, but I didn't understand a thing he said. Could you do it again? And then there's the forest of material enjoyment. So the same principle is that it takes more than one time to understand this, and he kept explaining it over and over again. It's interesting when we ask the 5th canto, and you'll see that same principle gets brought up again to give more analogies and going over it again from another angle of vision.
I had a student that asked me last week, maybe somebody could help me on this. He asked me, is everything we read, is it to be taken literally or figuratively? Are they like parables? All the stories that we reading in the Bhagavatam, etc. And of course I explained, no, these are all real, true historical events. But there are a few exceptions. So the one exception I could think of was the one we're talking about today, was Narada told King Prachanabarhi the story of Puranjana. So that's kind of like a parable. He made that up, but it had the same potency as if it was a real historical event. Didn't matter. He became purified by it. The other example I could think of was King Yayati, when he if you remember, he met the beautiful daughter of a brāhmaṇa who was down in a ditch, and he helped her out. And long story short, he married her, but then he started messing around with others, so he kind of got in trouble. So then he made up a story to tell his wife. He told the wife the story of the he-goat and the she-goat, which is kind of like a parable. She became purified by that as well, as did he by telling it. Are there any other examples anyone can think of in our scriptures of stories that are not historical events, but they were told like that to make a point? They're the only two that came to my mind, and I couldn't think if there's any others. Can anybody think of any?
I think I just mentioned that one.
Which Madame?
Yeah.
I thought it was the fifth canto when he talks about the forest of material enjoyment. I think he doesn't make it exactly as a story. The living entity, he just makes it understood like that. But I remember the problem is when you take everything to be allegorical, they talk about the Pandavas being the five senses, the etc. being the field of activities. Right. And it fits,
right.
So you have to be careful. No, historical. This actually happened like that.
They actually, I think actually happened.
Yeah. Rather than separate literal historical events with analogies, that there's a few exceptions or something, I would tell such a person that the lessons, and the purpose, behind these. This is the cream of the Vedas, Srimad Bhagavatam. So, and it is in this story form. A lot of the, not the Upanishads, but these Puranas and, and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. There are a lot of stories, and you get lessons by listening to them, and those lessons are what we're really putting emphasis on, because there's cultural and we're conditioned differently growing up in a pretty cold and impersonal environment, science driven sort of environment where we've been conditioned in a particular way. So to tell a person that's gone through that experience that all these exotic things, he has to embrace them as, historical events, that's not the route I would go. I would say, look, you can learn a lot just by going through these stories, and don't worry about the historical part of it, because also the Vedas are not chronological either. They're all over the place, and you're dealing with different planetary systems and all this stuff that's new to a Westerner.
Well, I think we do have to point out that they are historical events. They actually happened. They're not just like made up stories. It was a valid question, and you do have to answer the question properly.
Yeah,
but you make the point, and I agree with you. You have to answer the question.
But they're not. Yeah.
But they're all like you said. You said it. You hit the nail on the head. Same thing I explained is that the lessons are the same regardless whether it was a parable or whether it was actual historical event. It's in Shastra, and it's there for the same. They're all lessons for us to learn, and they're equally valuable, and they're equally purifying. But some people question, did the battle of Kurukshetra actually happen? It did. It was a historical event.
The Mayavadis take advantage. That's the problem, is the Mayavadis, they have their interpretation where they'll say it's not to Krishna you have to surrender, it's to the unborn within you. So there's usually a reason behind why Prabhupada explains it to us, is because of the tendency of what will happen if you start thinking that they're just stories. Everything's just stories. And it is the principle, but the principle is not to Krishna to surrender, but to the unborn within. And that was the example that he gave, following it out.
The other point Prabhupada's made for us is that in the age of Kali, we're much more inclined to hear stories rather than just read straight philosophy.
Prabhu, it's getting pretty late. It's like 7:30. Is that okay? Kind of
you're
go
like
ahead and
Kalasmi. You're like the
the Kala Chakra.
And chasing us. Yeah, the Kala Chakra. He comes chasing us here at the end to cut off the class. All right, Ron. We surrender. Thank you, Prabhu, for a lovely class, and we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Jai Hari Bol.